isn't it more communist? Because he's going seizing someone else's chair, like a communist government, seizing lands, seizing companies.
I think to a communist, I'm really glad that you're going for this, Rohan. I'm really glad. I think to a communist, the idea of someone else's is exactly the problem. That so deeply enmeshed are you in your capitalist ideology that you can't see that. To communists, they wouldn't think of it as someone else's. They think of it as everybody's.
Well, maybe that's what Angus is thinking. So it's everybody's chair, so he's put his jacket on there.
If you feel comfortable with this this resolution to the question.
Really.
Now, if you're Angus, does that make you Miles?
Yeah, I'm Miles.
Okay, right. Okay, nice to meet you. Hi. Yeah. That's okay. That's okay. So I've heard your voices, and it's nice to put a face to a voice because I've listened to a few of the podcasts. Okay, so I went onto SoundCloud, LBP. Is that right? Low blood pressure. And I think this is the 8th in the series. Am I right?
Yeah, correct.
So I'm sort of, I'm really glad to introduce everybody to this 8th podcast. We're back after somewhat of a delay. And I understand as a regular listener that at this point, there's generally a discussion about why there's been a delay, whose fault it was, and sort of what happened in the interim. So, who'd like to go first?
Well,
it's very accurate.
Sorry, have I jumped in? Have I stolen your...
No, that's fine. Let's just go for
okay. So, is that your job? Is that what you do?
That's the only job.
Okay, so...
I think we'll just roll from that, I think. Brilliant.
Okay.
We'll keep going. So whose fault is it?
I'm start off by saying it's Miles' fault with his constant extended break.
We're back eventually. After a difficult summer term, but now we thought we had to get another one out, so that's why we're back.
I think, Dr. McCormick, one question I had is how did you actually find the podcast? How did you find it?
You've got about 430 kind of listens or views or plays, so this is creates waves in the internet. Harry sent me the link.
Oh, he's the link.
Okay. I have to say, I think you probably kind of revived the podcast a little bit because we hadn't done one for a while, and if you hadn't kind of sent a message saying you're enjoying it and that you want to, you enjoy the podcast, you listen to it, that kind of maybe inspired us to make more. I don't know if we would have done more if you hadn't sent those messages.
Can't be laying down our Thailand following.
Yeah, well, for shame, because you clearly enjoy it.
Yeah.
And
it's not about the enjoyment; it's about finding the time to do it. All 5 of us have got a couple of hours to record after school, and also finding a place to do it.
Making the time to do it.
Yeah, well, we're doing that right now.
I think it all just kind of fitted in perfectly because we came to the science block when it started, and we were like, "Oh, this would be perfect." So this is the new podcast.
We call these rooms the boardrooms.
The boardrooms, yeah.
I
don't know what their official name is.
Yeah, with the old chair. If you are wondering what the chair debate was at the start, I had my blazer on the chair next to me, which Dr. McCormick trying to issue with, basically. Just in case because when you're at the start of the podcast, you bring absolutely no idea what's going on. Yeah. That's what's going on, basically. It's a nice little debate to get things going.
Oh, with your communist mindset,
So should we go to some questions, like discussion?
Let's start from the beginning. So for people like me that haven't had you as a teacher or don't know you, could you just briefly describe who you are and sort of like how you know Harry and Rohan in particular?
How brief?
Well, we'll go more into detail.
It's your decision.
Okay, my decision. Okay. Teacher. Macroeconomics. Microeconomics.
Yep.
2017
to 2018.
Okay, so is the economics teacher for Rohan and Harry?
Not anymore.
And also, this even spread to me and Angus, who don't do economics, the new head of economics. After 1 year at the school, so well done.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks. It's basically the previous guy, Mr. Eversfield, didn't want the job anymore. So it wasn't really, it wasn't the glorious gladiatorial. There was no glorious gladiatorial conquest behind the scenes.
Rumours flying about that you dethroned him.
No, I don't think it was really that. No, nothing of the sort.
When you joined, did you know that you were going to be head of econ? Because there have been a couple of teachers who've come in and then straight in their second year, but they become like head of department. Did you know?
No.
Oh, so was it Mr. Edsford's decision?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure the school would say that one simply passes the mantle to whoever one wants. But it's a close team and we get on really well. And
it seems like a good department.
Yeah.
I always think I'm not taught economics, but all the econ teachers you always see them hang out together, chatting. It just looks like a good, strong, tight knit community. I was thinking. No, this is a very strong department as well. I think the teachers are
popular. Yeah.
Why didn't you two do economics then? I mean, I'm not saying that it's the be all and end all, but it's sort of it's interesting to know.
We've called Angus on this a couple of times.
Yeah, well, the reason I chose not to at the end of last year, geography was probably one of my favourite subjects. I wanted to do that, and I knew I was going to take maths studies, so maths wasn't very good. And the reason I didn't choose econ was because I knew that it would be even though you can still take it with maths studies, I knew it would be narrowing an option for me, so I couldn't be able to take it further really. Because if you're doing maths studies, you can't really take econ further. And also I was really interested in philosophy as well, and now philosophy is what I'm going to do, and you can still do that with maths studies. But I still take an interest in economics and what's going on, but I figured that I could still sustain an interest in economics whilst taking philosophy and geography. But if I took economics, then it would just not a way so high, so obviously it would be fun, but I wouldn't be able to take it further, which I could do in philosophy and geography.
And presumably you worked out there was a statistical chance you'd end up in a class with these guys, and I gather that at least one of them you've been at school with for a really long time. Is that right?
No, that's these two.
Oh, those two. Oh, right. Okay, right.
Yeah.
Identify people's
I've
voices.
actually known Angus. We used to play club football together.
Right.
For 7 8
age
7 or 8. Yeah.
And I was surprised. Do you do history, Harry?
I don't actually.
Right.
I used to at GCSE.
Was there? I mean, because it seems like a scar that runs deep.
It does.
Do you do history?
Yeah, I really like it. So
Right. I mean, but it's easy to like things that we've been praised for doing, right? And it's hard when we've had our exam script torn up in front of our faces for cheating.
That was religious studies.
Was it RS?
Teacher, though. Same teacher.
Right.
So
the RS malfeasance cost you the history prize. Is
I
that
think it did. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because I got it.
What it would be on a Tuesday afternoon, I think it was, we'd have double history and then religious studies, all in the same class in the afternoon, same teacher, and it was the last period of the day, religious studies, little mini test, and I was accused of cheating, an allegation which I strongly reject, but I had it was ripped up in front of me. I was zeroed for the test, and when it comes to the end of the year and handing out prizes for particular subjects, that may well have influenced the teacher against me. Miles did, to be fair to Miles, he got the same score as me in the final exam, so well done to him. Congratulations, I say begrudgingly, through gritted teeth. But it was tough having it stolen off me.
Yeah, well.
Dr. McCormick, I wanted to ask you, if you had to describe your own teaching style, what would it be? Would you ever tear up someone's exam paper in front of them for any reason?
I think you know the answer to that, Rohan.
No, I want to hear in your words.
Well, no.
You've got it in lighter.
because you've asked me
to your teaching style, because these two haven't been
right.
taught by you. Me and Rowan have.
Well, I mean,
it's
I feel like this experience of having one's work torn up in front of one's face in public is sort of something that clearly is being handed down the generations by different teachers, and
witnessed it yesterday as happens.
Is that right?
So in economics yesterday, our new economics teacher, Mr. Holston,
yes,
a member of the class who I will not name, was not very focused on economics and was in fact doing another homework during the lesson. Mr. Holston clocked it, glasses on, walks over, picks it up, has a look at it. This isn't economics. Rips it up, straight in the bin.
Right.
Fair enough.
He says, "We're doing some nomics here, guys. What's going on?"
Right.
But a bit different to what I described. But he wasn't best pleased with that, basically.
My first.
What would be your reaction?
My first job. Well, one of my early jobs was working in a bank, and I got given a piece of work to do by the next morning, and I got given the piece of work at about 10 p.m. and I got it done by the deadline of 7 a.m. And the guy came in at about 10 a.m. and I'd left it on kind of just the side. I'd decided which side of the keyboard to put it on because I really wanted to please him. because it was like Stockholm syndrome, sort of like identifying with my captor and trying to really kind of get on his good books. And he came in, looked at the cover of it, and just shoved it off the side of the desk into his bin, and then turned around to see if I was looking, and indeed I was looking, and he gave me a sort of sinister smile, and then went for a coffee with someone else. So it's you're not alone. And having one's work destroyed is, I would say, a very unpleasant thing, but it seems like almost something that a lot of people go through as a rite of passage.
Yeah, that's me. How much are you two?
Nope. No. I hate that.
I do the opposite. I destroy sculptures. As we
Yeah, you might have heard of our podcast. Yeah, he destroyed the work of a teacher rather than the teacher destroying the work of his. But sort of back to the original question: how would you describe your teaching style?
I think the interesting thing about this school is you don't really. Do you get taught? I mean, does teaching happen? I feel like learning happens. I feel like people come out of my lessons learning, but mostly I feel like I like you to teach each other. So most of the stuff happens in kind of 2s and 3s.
So obviously, we've been drilled we've been taught quite a lot on how to revise. So what you're kind of referring to is the idea that through teaching others, it's a fantastic way to learn it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's very unlikely that the way that I explain something will work for everyone in the room. So there's going to be at least a couple of people each time I explain each thing that isn't going to be clear to them because I've explained it badly. If I get people sat next to their kind of best buddies in the room, then they're much more likely to tell their buddy the truth about whether they've understood than they are to tell me in front of everyone about whether they've understood. And so you're much more likely to have an honest exchange with a friend about whether you understand or not, and then that friend can help you understand. So I only really have to get it right half the time. If I teach one person in those pairs, then the other person can teach their friend. Really, in the process, as you've said, they end up teaching themselves a bit better. Explaining something is learning it fluently. And meanwhile, I can kind of, just enjoy, I guess, sitting and gazing at the wall while people are talking to their friends. So they come out feeling like they've not just listened to a teacher drone on. Every now and then, I'll end up having to listen to someone drone on. And I in my life, and one of the kind of great things about a teacher, obviously, is that usually you can stop that from happening because you're in charge. And one thing that's really important, I think, for teachers to do is to occasionally be forced to be taught, so that we remember that actually the best learning happens when the teacher kind of sets something up and then goes quiet.
I like that idea of purposely putting friends next to each other because they're more inclined to talk about things. Because I think you often get, obviously it's quite intimidating, particularly somewhere like Seven Oaks where there are people who are really, really smart. Kind of having to ask them for help, you feel uncomfortable doing it, and you feel like in the way that they're not mocking you, kind of feel like they are mocking you. I don't think I've ever heard a teacher before say that they would put friends next to each other in the hope that they'd explain it to each other and feel more comfortable doing that.
Well, I'm sure that lots of teachers think very deliberately about the way that they sit people. My experience really comes from university, where you go to lectures and you'd sit with your friends in lectures, and it was one of the things that got you through this kind of often terrible 1 hour long torture. Was being next to your friends and kind of passing notes about people. I guess I just kind of think about what is my favourite learning environment and then force everyone else to suffer through that. And that's sort of where it came from. It wasn't, I guess I make it sound, things often in life sound much more planned out when you look backwards, but when you look forwards, there's no plan.
Yes,
yeah. Okay, so obviously you just mentioned university. So I think when we were originally planning this podcast, we thought it would be interesting to maybe find out a bit more about you. So obviously, a bit more about your backstory.
Right.
So maybe if you could just talk to us a bit about how you found school. Obviously, you had a love for economics, and then you chose to pursue that further.
Well, it's really interesting you say that. I actually didn't study economics at school. I wanted to be a doctor, and I had two images in my head. Obviously, I thought I could play rugby for England and become a professional rugby player. And then after that, I was thinking, well, what would go with that? And being a doctor seemed like a good idea, you know. And this mainly was because my next door neighbour, but one, was a doctor and had a TVR, and often early in the morning would kind of wake up at like 5 or whatever and rev his engine loads to warm up the engine. And you know that if your next door neighbour revs the engine of a TVR, it's going to wake you up. And every now and then I'd go out there irate as a 16-year-old, kind of confronting him, being like, you know, I can't imagine what he would have thought, but I thought I was kind of really making an impact on him. And I thought, well, he's an important guy with a sports car and he's a doctor, so if I want to be an important guy who can wake up 16-year-olds early in the morning with reckless abandon, then I'd better become a doctor. So I did maths, chemistry, biology and English literature at A-level. So I was really like a science nerd. I went hospital visiting, and on a hospital visit, it was all going well for a few weeks, and then one week, this nonagenarian, this 90-something-year-old woman, thought that it was bath time. So as I walked onto the ward, she just literally stripped and started walking towards me. And as a 16, 17-year-old, that will stay with you.
Yeah, that you remember.
That will. So that sort of gave me the sense that maybe I wasn't cut out for medicine. So I started sort of grasping at straws and just picked the subject with the longest number of names in the title of the subject, which was PPE, which only one uni offered at that point. So basically that made all my decisions all at once. I didn't want, I sort of panicked. I was like, here I was going to choose my job for life, and then I realised, like, actually, I found something new out that made me think twice about that, so why don't I hedge my bets completely? So pretty intimidated. I'd not done any of the subjects before.
Where did you go? Can't mind me asking.
University.
Yeah. You're not saying, okay.
Well, it's obvious,
Yeah,
but I mean, it's sort of. I think there's one thing that's really important is that in a climate like this, where you guys have been kind of raised within a sort of upper middle class milieu of success, that you don't start to think that the only way to be successful is to have the best of everything, in inverted commas. Like, the only way to be successful in what car you buy is to have a Lamborghini or whatever. The success is about living a happy life, not about going to the right places or being seen with the right people, or having your nights out at bougie and.
You referring to your own personal experience there, because obviously you were an investment banker you worked in, obviously a very high paid job but also very demanding, and something must have prompted you to choose a career change and pursue teaching.
Yeah, I think you become like the people that surround you. So in this environment, if a parent was asking me why should I send, or a prospective parent saying why should I send my kids to this school, I'd say, well, if you go around, you ask yourself, do you want your children to be like the children? I mean, it's weird to call you guys children, but the young people in this environment. And I think most people would say, yeah, actually, they seem really nice. And in a bank, you'll end up being like the people around you, just as in a school you'll end up kind of being. It's really hard not to end up like the people around you. And so, rather than making deliberate choices about the kind of person you want to be on a daily basis, because that's really hard, it's much easier to make a choice about the culture of the institution you're going to spend loads of hours in. And then the kind of person you want to be will kind of take place. Does that make sense? That will happen passively. Yeah. If you go into like a brutal environment, then you're going to become a person who has to survive in a brutal environment. It probably means you're going to have to be a brutal person. If you go in an environment where people are really kind, you're probably going to end up really kind. Does that make sense? Like, everyone knows that if you want to do well at a sport, you should play with the best other players in that sport, or chess, play against the best players, you get better. So you really are shaped by your environment, and one of the biggest and most important, I think, undervalued decisions is choosing your environment. So there I am in the bank, like becoming a person that I recognise less and less and admire less and less, and looking ahead at people who are more senior and deciding if I admire them. And really the only thing to admire about them was their economic power. And they weren't really positioned to enjoy it that much. Some were better than others at that. And I was never really drawn by economic power. I never really found it that exciting. Some people do, but I didn't, and I don't think there's anything wrong with finding it exciting. And so I guess that made me rethink, like, what institution would better work. I think there's something awesome about being in a place where your job is to help other people.
Oh, interesting. I when I was like touring like some parents like last year, I was also saying like a similar thing about how like they were sort of asking about like, what's the best thing about Sevenoaks, and I always like said that it's like the people that are here, because like when you're surrounded by people, like there's always someone better than you at something. It doesn't matter what it is. There's always someone better. So like that's quite positive.
Well, it's a good and a bad thing though, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if you sort of have if you have the mentality for it, it's a good thing. But for some people, I don't know, they might prefer being, I guess, you know what I mean, like a big fish in a small pond. I think even if you're comfortable there, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Being uncomfortable is good sometimes.
So would you have said that the bank you're working in was like quite a brutal environment, and there were brutal people doing brutal things, definitely?
What about the Marines?
Well, we can talk about that. I think the most shocking experiences of the bank weren't ostentatiously brutal. It was much more. Every now and then, you'll read a book where there's a character in the book who really does enjoy being mean. And where it's not the outcomes of the meanness that are beneficial and enjoyable and that they're pursuing, but they're actually getting pleasure, a sadistic pleasure, from seeing someone else's suffering, and from almost naughtily getting away with being a bad person. And I think those brutality, therefore, isn't just working hard. Because if you really love what you're doing, like working hard isn't brutal. It's kind of like you're doing what you love. Like you do it more if you didn't have to sleep.
Yeah.
The brutality comes where I think actually it's a loss of innocence. So have you seen the movie Platoon? The tagline of sorry. Yeah. So there's the movie has a tagline. I don't know if you know what it is. I'm going to get it wrong, but it's something like the first casualty of war is innocence. And I think really, like the first casualty, or it's not really the first casualty, but like one of the casualties of I think a working lifestyle like investment banking is innocence, and it's an innocence about human nature that you kind of come to realize that human nature has a lot more negative. There's a lot more negative facets sometimes than you might be led to believe by Walt Disney.
So what do you think human nature is then? I've heard you do like philosophy.
Everyone is a philosopher.
Yeah, like you've studied philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're clearly interested in it. What you're talking about now is very philosophical.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like, so do you tend towards like Hobbes' account of human nature, psychological egoism? As in like, kind of like ultra-capitalist, everything is done for ourselves. Is that, if you kind of think...
Well, for me to believe that, I'd have to think that the reason that I want to help Rohan and Harry become better economists is for myself alone, right?
Yeah, so like, as in the reason you want to see them do well is because it will make
you feel better
for your own style of teaching and feel like you're doing something good as well. Which I don't think is an issue. I think it's a good thing because it drives you to act well also.
I think that theory was going to find it really hard to explain the most interesting facets of human nature. Yeah. So it won't be able to explain large parts of Shakespeare, for example.
Okay.
It won't be able to explain kind of great examples of self-sacrifice, supererogatory behaviour.
Well.
So I mean, okay, it's a useful organising principle for complex societies to treat everyone as if they are selfish and mutually concerned about profiting at other people's expense. Yeah. But it won't lead to a fulfilling life if we base everything on that, and it won't. It will miss out large pictures of what is the human experience.
But I'm saying in that sort of investment bank environment, would you say that people act more towards like that?
I think they have to. I think if you bring a coat hanger to a knife fight, you're not going to last very long.
Okay. When you decided investment banking, so the world of finance wasn't for you. What then drove you to make the transition into teaching? Because it's obviously a drastic change of environment.
Yeah. Well, you got to make a judgment about how much money is enough. And you actually don't need very much money. When I was a grad student, I survived on probably $7 or $8 a year. You don't need much more than that. And basically that puts people like us, I'm including you in that, able to choose between just about any job. And lucky enough to be in a position where most of the things that you apply for are going to kind of welcome you and give you a shot. So then it was back to my original logic of the people at the next stage of this job I don't really admire. I might covet their economic power, but I don't admire them as people, and I don't need their economic power because $8 a year will do me. So I want to be an organisation where I admire people, and it's as simple as you just think about who you admire. And pretty quickly you kind of admire people that help other people, whose profit or wages or bottom line isn't influenced by how good a job they do of helping. I think we can talk about that. I think that's quite important. So when I'm teaching Rohan, he knows that I'm not doing it because I'll get a bonus if I do a really good job. And that creates maybe potential for incentive problems, but it also unleashes the possibility of a real altruistic element in behaviour in that relationship. And I thought about the people who I knew who were like 65 years old and really satisfied with how their life had gone. And a disproportionate number of them were teachers. I mean, just a really disproportionate number of older people I knew who retired. Teachers just seemed really jolly. They seemed like they were young for their age. You meet a 65-year-old investment banker, often they're kind of like haggard and seem kind of worn out and negative about the world. You meet a 65-year-old teacher and it's like they're still learning, they're still willing to chat, they can talk to people of all ages.
What other professions were there apart from teachers that like you found were fulfilled?
If I'm honest, it was basically that. It was like a light went on. It was a really...
Have you done any teaching experience before?
I taught undergrad. I mean, like at university, nobody really teaches anyone else. Like 1 hour a week, you spend time as an undergrad with a postgrad or a professor, and okay. You'll do that in little groups and tutorials. So I ran tutorials for groups of pairs of undergrads for a few years, for 3 or 4 years. So I taught undergrads, but I think the total number of undergrads I taught was like 70 or 80. Yeah. So in my first year of teaching, I'd ended up teaching more people than I taught in.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask about the Marines, because a lot of like our avid viewers wanted to know about your experience in the Marines and what you had to say for it.
So when were you in the Marines? Because when I found this out, I mean, first...
How did you find this out?
Well, you didn't tell us.
I think you told our class that... you told our class that, like, something about outside the Marines you're only throwing one punch in rugby or something like that.
Right.
And
Tell us about that story.
Oh, well, that's really quick. Someone stamped on the back of my head in rugby when I was about 15. It's the only time I've ever thrown a punch, and I missed.
Yeah.
And I got sent off. So I mean, there's everything you need to know. There's everything you need to know there. I mean, it's sort of, I was a hot-headed 15-year-old who'd just been stamped on the back of the head because I was bridging over in a ruck. And
people will relate to that story.
Well, I think there's something quite high impact about having someone stamp on the back of your head with metal studs that causes the best parts of your brain to shut down and all the worst parts to kind of fire up in self-defense. But I think that's one of the things that I don't really like about rugby, if I'm honest. I played it for a long time, and about 5 years ago I started to really dramatically change my view of the sport.
In what? Because of
I think there's nothing that it teaches that can't be taught in peaceful ways. I think it was invented to keep young men at school from stoning the housemaster's cat or whatever, and to get them inculcated in a colonial mindset that would enable them to kind of group together across different nations to subjugate local people.
I agree. I don't think there's anything inherently taught by it, but I definitely think there's things to gain as a young person going by playing rugby.
Sure.
I've played quite a few sports, and definitely the team, the best bonding and the best kind of feeling you get as being part of the team, and the pride you get playing for school in the rugby team is definitely more than any other sport, and you definitely feel a lot closer to the people you're playing with just because you're there with them. because it can be a battle sometimes, really, in big rugby matches, and like you do feel really close to people around you more so than in a sport. And while maybe it can encourage bad behaviour on the pitch, I do think like I just come back from a tour of Australia, Hong Kong, and after every single game we'd have like post-match like functions where we'd meet and chat with the opposition. This is after playing rugby with them 70 minutes and kind of hitting each other as hard as possible. You sit down, have a chat with them, and like you kind of become friends. I'm still talking to some of them, still manage some of them, haven't played rugby against them. So I see what you're saying, that it does, it can inspire like an aggressive mentality on the pitch. I do think there are definite benefits that come from playing rugby.
You know, I hear everything you're saying. I think all of those things, in my view, can be taught without needing to smash into other people. And the special bonding experience you're describing, I've also experienced that, but I think it does come because some prehistoric part of your brain gets fired up by being in a battle. And when we think about that, I'm not sure that that's the part of our brain that we should be invigorating.
So,
but you know, like millions of people disagree with me, so you know, and there's no way for me to prove them wrong.
You coach obviously, don't you?
Yeah.
Do you enjoy coaching?
I like teaching people.
Yeah, fair enough.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
I've seen improvement.
if I'm just to draw it back, sorry, because we're about to talk about your experience in the Marines, and when Rohan brought it up, you didn't seem too keen to talk about it. If I was in the Marines, I'd be telling everyone. I can't lie. Is it? What was your experience?
I think that one of my concerns is that is you could probably draw a line from my views about rugby to my views about this subject.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And think about the obligation teachers have to think about their role modelling, and that some things to young people seem really exciting and alluring, and the older you get, the more you feel like I hope that you want to protect young people from making decisions that are red-blooded.
So,
And I think you don't want to feel like you're using the privileged position you have as an educator to make people think that some choices are glamorous and others aren't, because because the people that are in the armed forces do an amazing job of keeping us safe. And my experience in the armed forces was very abridged due to illness. I got a big throat infection almost straight away. And I think that for me to talk about it, therefore, would be to detract from people who actually served in combat.
I understand.
And also, for me to talk about it would be to encourage young people to think that to have respect in the community, the best way of securing respect and belonging is to serve in a sort of fighting unit, which I wouldn't want to point young people in that direction either. Does that make sense?
What I'd like to ask though is that at this school, obviously we do have CCF.
Yeah.
As a teacher who's clearly been in the forces, you'd think that you'd be in it, but it sounds to me like you have a fundamental problem with what the CCF teaches.
I'm okay with you asking the question. I think you're obviously, this is a good illustration of how exciting and interesting it is to teach at this school. I think that the way to resolve that apparent contradiction is to talk and to emphasise the service element of the CCF. That I would worry if someone who had a philosophical objection to armed service would be required to serve in a CCF unit somehow. But I would be frankly stupefied if that happened. Given the philosophy of the school, it couldn't. I think that the reality is that nations have to defend themselves, and the reality is that you don't know when you're going to have to defend yourself, so you have to prepare to defend yourself. And so the CCF is part of what's called the armed strength, I think, or the prepared strength, which is ordinary civilians who are trained in rudimentary military activities. So it has value from a national defence perspective, and it has immense value in teaching leadership skills, organisational skills, and service ethos. So I'm not a detractor from it. I think that it, it's a bit like rugby, something that was once a really big part of my life, and you change, life moves on.
Interesting.
Also, I mean, just to add to that, I think it's very different. I think like CCF is more just like teaching people, and like it's more enjoyable. They get, and on the service team, they now students from non-academy come in and join in. It's just kind of like a community
Well,
thing.
at the end of the day, the way you can see it is that you're giving kids guns and teaching them to fight. Because that's what the CCF is. We were in the army and we were learning real British military drills that would prepare us for combat. And while there are many elements to it, if you strip it all down, you're taking, young teenagers and you're giving them weapons. Obviously not real weapons, but there is a sort of... The elements of the CCF can definitely be seen to be one, maybe not of peace, and if you're opposed to, like fighting and war, that you draw a problem with what the CCF is doing.
It's like making the same sense they think like paintball should be banned or something, because it's shooting.
Yeah, people say that. People say video games should be banned. It's all a big debate.
Yeah, I just think there's more aspects. Like I did it for a year, didn't really enjoy it, but it was like picking out like once.
Oh, yeah, I mean, two of us were in the CCF. I think we both left after 1 year.
Yeah.
So we're not really the people to champion it. But my brother's in the RAF and he loves it. I wish I'd done the RAF. Like he went up in a plane, and he I won't go on about it, but I think the opportunities it gives you are great.
Yeah, I mean, you're sort of saying that it's like giving kids with guns. I mean, it's not like you're actually giving them guns to like shoot like that. I mean, it's not like the US where like literally parents give their kids guns.
Yeah.
It's not quite.
That's another topic. Yeah.
I think that what you're pointing to is that a hardcore pacifist would have potentially a major philosophical objection if they saw what was happening in some parts of the school on a Thursday afternoon. I think on the other hand, as I've said, there's a sort of practical reality of if we think we're the good hombres, we need to prepare to defend ourselves from the bad hombres. We may not even know who the bad hombres are, but we think of ourselves and our value system and our kind of liberal culture that welcomes people as a good thing, I hope. And the reality is that there are places around the world that don't share the same tolerance and acceptance of people as we do. And that liberal culture does need to be protected. So we couldn't do without a military, I think, in a practical world. And from that you can justify things earlier in life for people in terms of training and preparation.
Would you say it's sort of quite a relative? So you're talking about like the mentality is that I guess like we're good and like we have to defend against the bad. Would you say that's sort of a relative thing that like that like there is no objective like right or wrong? Like more relativism almost.
I think it's pretty obvious that the Declaration of Human Rights is a 20th century or 21st century phenomenon. That it doesn't make any sense to say that people have a right to shelter at a prehistoric period. You know what I mean? William the Conqueror comes over with a band of kind of male warriors, and they start insisting on shelter and healthcare from the Anglo-Saxons. It doesn't make any sense.
Oh, it's horrid. Yeah, I do medieval history, and when you look back at some of the stuff, honestly, it is shocking.
Yeah.
Like,
But on this moral relativism point, I sort of think of a Martin Luther King quote, which is that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it tends towards justice. I think I've got that quote about right. And this makes justice a destination that has a definite description. So you account for moral relativism in the past and today, but you kind of at least it's hard to not have a subjective leaning towards a liberal, tolerant set of values that accept people from all sorts of cultures and backgrounds. And it's hard not to see that lead to a sort of Fukuyama end of history type destination. This has become quite technical quite fast. I'm wondering, I mean, I've listened to a few podcasts now. You're just going to lighten the tone a little bit.
I agree.
It's all quite intense.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
No, this is the most philosophical one I've ever done. You've definitely brought that. So.
Well, the questions have driven me there. As an unwilling hostage. I think that
I think people want to hear that.
Yeah.
People find it interesting.
one of the things that I'm wondering, having listened to the podcast, is clearly this is going places. You've got to make a decision about whether to get an agent, how to get your sound out there, and when to cut the dead wood.
He's just pointed at Rohan there.
Why? Why pointing at me?
Right.
Did we say that in the podcast?
Why?
Or did you just
Why?
make up from listening?
This is
Because Angus
why.
and Harry say that.
Why?
This is where.
Why? No, I don't want to hear why.
This is where you need to stick up for yourself.
No, I don't ask why.
The other week, you said you don't stick
Why?
up for
Why?
yourself.
Why point to me?
I didn't.
Oh, for God's sake. Anyway, for like the listeners, Dr. McCormick sort of pointed at me as he said Deadwood, and now is refusing to explain himself.
I'm just saying, sometimes you've got to face these realities. We've talked about selfish people. We've talked about unselfish people. And do you guys want to go places, or do you want to stay as a group
Yeah,
of
but
five?
that's selfish, I think.
What?
I'm not driven by that.
Yeah.
He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah,
we'll
I
keep
can
him
see
on board.
For God's sake.
We'll keep him on board.
Okay, that's good.
We wouldn't ditch him. No chance.
You can see that everyone around the table is accepting the premise that we're arguing from.
Mm.
The premise I proposed. It's been accepted. Obviously not by Rohan. I'm just.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because of your comments about fat people, Rohan.
Oh
I
dear.
have noticed.
Well, it wasn't just me.
Well,
I made one of those
Did you have to hear those comments?
some of them stand out, don't they? They
Yeah.
stand out.
Which one?
We chose to.
Which ones do
We
you...
tend to come from the same corner. I think what was really interesting for me was listening to stories about. To be honest, so far I'm surprised not to have heard more from Harry, because he's a dominant voice
Yeah, I
normally,
think that.
Yeah.
and there's a bit of a vacuum, bit of a banter vacuum in the corner. And I really enjoyed listening to the description of a sort of exchange you had with a French skier. I think I'm right.
Oh, yeah, we ended the
Oh,
podcast.
yeah.
Speaking of throwing
That's
punches
the one.
and sort of puffing your chest out at people.
No, what is...
Tell this, because that one got terrible views for some
No,
reason.
say that.
I
It's
know.
really a funny story.
It's our best one for sure.
Say it again, because someone will get views. 'Cause
No, so that was this year in Val d'Isère skiing resort I go to in France. Basically at the top of this, it's this big run. If you Google it, it's called La Face, the face, and it's this massive. You see it. You come into the resort and you can't miss it. It's like the biggest run in the resort. It's literally vertical, straight down. It's like broken down into stages, so you get like a bit of respite at like different points of it. But I'm literally like just waiting like at one of these points, right? And then this snowboarder, and I've always had it is always a snowboarder. Anyone who snowboards, you're a nuisance. Anyone who skis, you'll understand what I'm talking about. I don't know if you happen to ski yourself, but
I was just reflecting on how like upper middle class the conversation is, and I'm finding it easy to follow, and I was thinking about what that means about me and how I've used my life. So yeah, I ski. I ski.
Right, so you don't snowboard then? So
No.
before I can do it,
No.
okay, we're good to continue then.
Kicked out face.
I'm sort of at the top of this bit I described, and then the snowboard comes clattering down the mountain. Clattered into the back of me, and I've gone absolutely flying. Skis flown off, boots undone, nearly off, and I'm a bit winded for a second. I'm like, what's happened here? And then I realise I've sort of been clattered down. I see my skis sort of at the top of the slope, and I see my instructor sort of collecting them as he comes down. I thought, right, well, there's no way this guy's sort of gonna leave without explaining to me, what he was doing there, because he just come crashing in, and it was absolutely diabolical. And then I said, look, I mean, what were you doing? What on earth were you doing? He said, what? piss off. What do you piss off? And he just clattered me down the mountain. I was like, you know, what's going on here? And then he just shoves me on the ground. I was like, well, I'm not having this. So I just got up and shoved him over. And then my ski instructor come over as well, and he was French, and they were just like shouting at each other in French. And I was like, I'm just going to sort of, put my skis back on now. I've kind of set them off. And then we eventually skied off. But I was, it was kind of like when you described when someone like trod on your face in rugby, right? I mean, I wasn't really thinking, well, I was thinking rationally actually, because I thought, it's like, he's clattered into me from behind.
Yeah.
He could at least explain to me what's going on. I didn't know what nationality this person was, it didn't really matter. I thought, at least give me an explanation, at least apologise. And I could see as he was coming down, he's sort of weaving his way down, he wasn't stopping.
Am I right in thinking that essentially someone crashed into you?
Yeah.
You shouted at them, they shoved you, you shoved them, and then you skied away. That's
Yeah.
okay.
No, please answer.
It doesn't. What do you think, Rohan? What do you think about it?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if I should be honest, because I know Harry doesn't really have a great liking for the people down in France.
No.
Is that right?
That's incorrect.
What?
Oh, whoa. Hang on.
Incorrect.
This is absolute BS. You said soberly you don't like the French.
That's incorrect. I'm not gonna have.
It's probably on the last podcast. If you're listening, you can probably go through that and you can find out.
What I said on
the
that
quote.
podcast is, in general, in that resort, it's a very rude culture.
No, I'm not surprised at that.
And what I meant by that, and I explained this actually, is that you'll generally get people in sort of ski queues, so they sort of formulate at the like chairlifts. They'll just barge straight to the front.
They do.
I mean, we're English. I'm good at queuing, so.
Right? I'm queuing just the same
I don't
as you
ski,
are.
so.
So, what's going on here?
Can I ask, in those queues,
Yeah.
are you like, just kind of little quick poll, who puts their skis on top of the person in front of them's skis when you're queuing? Like, because that's a thing, right? Like,
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I get someone else.
I don't ski.
and you don't, or you don't.
If someone skis or I'm not.
If it's crowded enough, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you do it. Yeah.
I don't ski.
You don't. Okay.
I haven't
that's fine.
been for a few
I mean,
years.
that's fine.
but- I definitely wouldn't. It's every man for himself in that situation. You're just trying to get on the lift and get out.
Sort of Clogsy and free for all.
Yeah.
So I think that's a key question in those queues. And the second is, there's the kind of skier who goes down the child lane, the ski school lane.
Right.
Are you the kind of skier that uses that? You clearly, yes, you would use that ski school lane. Dog eat dog.
In what sense? What do you mean?
Would you take the shortcut of the ski school?
Can I confess, I've done that before.
Yeah.
Just later.
Getting to know each other.
However, I feel like I don't go into ski school, but I have
course
an
you don't.
instructor with me. So actually, I'm being led by them, right? So they, if I could just pass the buck a bit.
You are passing the buck. Okay, I'm really glad that you've acknowledged it. It's classic Harry Nicol, like honesty. You've done something
What was
that
that?
is questionable, but you're owning up to it.
When's this? What am I doing?
Just now.
It's not from just now.
Has happened before.
It's Harry Nicol,
I mean,
which
it's
implies it's happened before.
Honestly.
I think you're self-aware, in these scenarios.
Well,
Be invidious to call out particular examples.
No, please.
No,
don't.
it wouldn't. It'd be brilliant.
It'd be brilliant.
No, I don't want to do that. Don't
Why
want
not?
to do that. But again, it's down to the teacher's privileged position of pastoral leader that enables me to escape going into the specifics.
Are we allowed to go into this, because we're talking about altercations, are we allowed to talk about, what was it, the post van?
Oh my god, yeah. With Mr. Holston and the postman.
Yeah,
I don't know what happened.
To this.
Yeah, no, what happened? Can you please explain this? We have no clue what happened.
Really, it's an
Please.
incredible event that Mr. Holston and I were sat in the economic staff room M3, right? Just to the
Yeah, so I was in M2 at the time.
and a chap sort of came to the door, a postman with a parcel, and knocked on the window of the economic staff room, and Mr. Holston and I looked up, and he sort of jumped up first and went out to the door and answered it and said, "Can I help?" And the guy said, "Yeah, I'm looking to deliver a parcel," and I think the exact interchange was something like Mr. Holston said, "Oh, the reception is the next building along." and the guy kind of just tried to deliver the parcel anyway. And Mr. Holston said, no, like, you know, I'm teaching a lesson or something. And the guy said something quite rude.
Yeah, no, I heard, because
we said that word on the podcast.
The only thing I heard, because I thought when I was in M2,
Yeah.
because I was getting taught this time, I thought it might have been like a student and Mr. Holston having an argument. All I heard was Mr. Holston shout at the top of his voice, "Don't you dare talk to me like that! Why would you say that to me?"
I
heard what he was called.
I didn't hear what Mr. Holston said in response to that. But
Yeah,
then
he
I think
shouted
it
loud.
generated into the guy tried to enter the building. And obviously, if you're Mr. Holston in that situation, it's quite terrifying. Like,
It's random guy. The guy just
there's a guy with a parcel trying to muscle his way in.
abusing you, trying to get in.
He's swearing at you, you know.
Yeah.
And Mr. Holston's kind of like struggling with the door, trying to close it. But you would. You're not going to say, "Oh, do come in? We'll talk more." And he's probably got in his mind that there's kind of young people in the building as well, and so he's not just him who's at risk, but you know. Don't know what this guy with the parcel's capable of if he's sort of going to so quickly fly off the handle and the hinge. And Mr. Holston, in the midst of the struggle, sort of starts kind of shouting out.
Yeah.
And I think both Mr. Eversfield and myself kind of converge on the hallway at the same moment.
Mr. Smith ran out the class.
That's it, Mr. Smith, yeah, and two or three of us.
Probably numbered.
Two or three of us. Whoa.
Might as well.
Well, no,
Come on,
it's
man.
slow.
That's what you called for.
I love Smith, man.
No, Smith is my football coach. He's funny.
He's not anymore.
No,
Come on, man. I love Smith.
So there's three of us. There's three of us in the corridor now enjoying Mr. Holston, and the guy kind of melts off and drives his van away, and obviously Mr. Holston's very shaken up. Well, it's just, you know, I think it's probably an ordinary event for any central London postcode, but in a school, you know, in sort of a quiet suburb, this is sort of front page news.
What I don't get is like why the postman wanted to come in. Like, I don't get it.
Is yours a sort of philosophical inquiry about his function? That a postman shouldn't enter, he should simply use the letterbox. That's why there's a letterbox. I'm not sure what you mean.
I'm sort of asking that, like if you're a postman and you want to like deliver a parcel and like they're saying no, you don't just come in. Like what's the rationale behind it?
Well, aggression. I feel like that's clear. He's aggressive. He wants.
One building
get
over. So what was the sort
He
of...
was very distressed about the one building.
Yeah.
Presumably, it was having to drive such a short distance, or
Just
potentially
walk it.
even walk. Yeah, potentially even walk. But yeah, I mean, you know, you really got to feel Mr. Holston. Mr. Holston had a bit of a raw end of the deal there, and had to go straight into teaching.
Speaking of aggressive outbursts, I thought this is the perfect time to bring this up.
I'm gonna stay out of this now.
During
Am I going to no comment it?
I think you're going to
Yeah, you
remember
probably
this
are.
very
Yeah,
well.
probably
So
are.
during the
Comment.
snow days, you very uniquely actually, I've never had this, where a teacher, rather than set work, you chose to sort of run an online class.
Oh, God.
And during one of your online sessions, the macro session, which I find funny because you don't even teach the student for macro, someone...
You mean Rohan, right?
Oh, he knows.
Rohan had
I'm
a
not
very...
going to say
Just
it.
explain.
I'll explain myself.
Rohan had a very loud outburst during the call, which you were very unhappy with.
Oh, can we say what he
You seemed
said?
to then send an email about.
No.
What was your reaction to that when that was going on?
I mean, I think in any walk of life, people have the opportunity to make mistakes and learn, and so everybody had their names as their chat ID. Different people were trying to choose their name to pretend to be me. So like they were putting their name down as my name and logging in, so that it looked like there were two of me in the room, and spamming the chat of the video. And then one person decided to sort of, at strategic moments, unmute and blare sounds down the microphone, and then mute again. And then one person who later, I mean, who knows whether it's true or not, but later said that it was an accident, sort of did that, but blared out a swear word.
Yeah, blurred out profanities on the chat.
And you know, I think it's just a good example of how different approaches to learning can be committed in this school. So I think it's to celebrate.
Was your experiment a success then? Doing it?
I haven't done it since.
You did. You did it the next day.
I did.
You did
It was successful
Yeah.
the next day. I think. If I'm honest with you, I'm a big one for experimental technology. I think that I suspect that online classes will happen more and more in the next 20 years.
I do it already for tutoring.
Yeah, they do
I
it
used to,
for tutoring.
It's
Yeah.
actually really effective.
I just.
I think with the first time you did it, you had a lot of people in the call.
Yeah,
and I
that's
think
the
that's
problem.
what made it unproductive. Whereas when you did it with just our class the next day, I felt like it was more conducive to actually like learning
Yeah,
effectively.
because if I'm right, you might have I can't remember if you went through the names there, because then they're you actually know who's in, and you have to register people. That's there's no way you can sort of get away with it.
People can be held responsible.
I'd say that. I think when I found out about it, obviously I heard they were talking about it in the chat. I thought it was pretty impressive actually.
It was a good idea. I mean, obviously people are gonna.
I spent the whole day looking forward to it. So the call at 2 o'clock.
Well, I think the thing about snow days is the reality is not as alluring as the idea. And after a day or two of snow days, you just feel like cabin fever, and you get the sense of why people in kind of mountain resorts are so rude, because they spend most of the year by themselves. You know, with these vast open spaces. And then suddenly 1 million tourists descend for just a few weeks.
Yeah.
So I think it was a really fun experiment. I think that people probably enjoyed the idea of a few days off school, and after 2 weeks of snow were kind of getting frustrated. So I wanted learning to carry on. I also think it's worth saying here that although the gentleman who sort of trolled expletives into the sound waves made his mistake, he was also honest enough to own up the next day, which speaks volumes about his character.
Did you know who it was?
Yeah, so what again,
it wasn't very discreet.
well, the thing about these technology systems is you can you can obviously see as the host of the call a lot more data than just the participants, and so you know who is talking at any given time. But it's worth saying that it does speak volumes about the character of the student body in the school, that people, I think, in general own up to things, and
Yeah.
That's partly about the culture the school creates, partly also about the individuals.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. And then I think I've got a couple of sort of viewer questions. That various viewers sort of sent in.
Yeah,
So-
the fans have sent
Yeah,
in
the fans.
questions.
They sort of sent in questions that they wanted to ask. The first one is Harrow versus Sevenoaks. What are the differences? Surely you prefer Sevenoaks. And is there anything do you have any stories from Harrow to share?
I'm really happy at Sevenoaks, and it was a transfer from Portsmouth to Southampton, and it's gone well. I'm playing regular first team football at Southampton, and like any ex-Portsmouth player, I'm just not worrying about looking in the rearview mirror. So I don't really have any stories to share. I think it's a very different school. I think it's really, really clear from the outside what you're getting at each school.
Okay.
And here you're getting, really super energized, smart, creative, liberal and respectful student body and staff. I think you guys get treated really like almost colleagues by the teachers, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that
There's a
how you have to
discipline.
tip your hat or something? There's that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I've not told anyone about their uniform in the last year and a bit.
No, some teachers do.
Yeah, but I think the uniform's important. I think I think there's a difference between taking your appearance seriously as a sign of respect to those around you, and occasionally being pulled up on it as a way of reminding you that in business or in professional life or later in as part of having a job, you're actually expected to conform to certain things that aren't painful to conform to, because it confers an impression on outsiders and insiders in that business or institution, versus nitpicking in order to establish hierarchy.
I agree. And
Is
then,
Harrow all boys?
Yes.
yeah, it is.
What's the, you want to comment on that? Like the differences between all boys environment?
Yeah, the atmosphere.
Yeah, school.
There's I think it's a short story by Ernest Hemingway called Men Without Women, which is a sort of a description of the sort of traditional activities that men, especially in traditional Spanish communities, get up to. And I think I just describe any community that, certainly, I mean, I've never experienced an all-female community because I'm male, so by experiencing it I would change that, but I think any all-male communities I've been in have tended to lose a bit of perspective and have tended to become weird enclaves of, not necessarily always weird, but not 100% healthy enclaves of masculinity. And there's something about being mostly or entirely around men that enables some men to behave differently and allow different, perhaps less positive parts of personalities to express themselves. But I also think, I went to boys' boarding school until I was 14, and I think that being around in an all boys environment can be very healthy. I think it's I think there's no wrong answer here.
Fair enough. Then I've got a second viewer sent in question, and that is sometimes like the topic of politics comes up in lessons, and I think not just one, like quite a few viewers wanted to know, what is your actual political stance socially and economically? Are you more like sort of left or right on both of those subjects? I mean, you don't have to answer this, but if you'd like to, then
it's fine if you don't, because we live in such a sort of judgmental.
Quite a lot in our lessons, for example, you play the role of devil's advocate very well and very effectively. So I think it's quite hard for certainly me and other people I've spoken to. Like, it's quite hard to know what your political stance is, and that's testament to how well you can argue and understand.
I think I used to think that by hiding my view, it would enable me to teach views better. I think what I now think is that it's okay for me to have a view, as long as I communicate clearly that any view has shortcomings and strengths. And I don't know all the shortcomings and strengths of all the views, right? I mean, it's just infeasible. But we just have to know by extrapolation that every view in politics has to have a strength and weakness. Otherwise, the best view would now be dominant, and there would be a disagreement.
Exactly.
So I think that there's elements of right-wing political theory that involve respect and personal responsibility that are really indispensable in any community. But you want people to take their own lives. Where's my...
But he starts talking about right wing, he starts going, I agree.
Well, yeah, I mean,
the value he's talking about. I wasn't really thinking about right wing. I was sort of thinking about the value that he was talking about and like how it linked in. I was like, I sort of agree with that.
So I think personal responsibility is very important in any community, and I also think that a community without personal responsibility kind of starts to rob people of the chance at dignity. On the other hand, I think to be too extreme on personal responsibility, it just becomes a ridiculous stance where people who haven't had the chance to become responsible in a meaningful way are held responsible for decisions that they never took or for outcomes that affected them that they didn't have a role in shaping. So I'd say responsibility is a really important one to think about. And on the other hand, I'd say that it's really essential to give people a foothold in society and a sense that by working and being responsible, that they can actually foster and develop and drive positive change in their lives. And if you have a whole generation, let's say, of Spanish people in the last 10 years or women in Saudi Arabia, let's say, are making big umbrella statements here, so just hot shake that. I think that if you have groups like that who just are very likely to be at best an uphill battle, if not quite quickly hit a ceiling in terms of how well off they can be, you can kind of expect them to check out in many ways and to expect others to pick up the buck for their actions, because being responsible doesn't make things better. and one of the benefits of capitalism is it encourages people to work harder, which tends to have social benefits within boundaries. On the other hand, one of the benefits of socialism is that it encourages and has a bent towards sharing, which obviously is a cornerstone of a community. So I think that the dichotomy persists and attains because you need elements of both.
Okay, that's quite interesting actually.
It's a good answer.
People that try and sell one or the other are unrealistically undervaluing the strengths of the alternate philosophy.
Okay, that's quite an interesting answer.
So quite essential then, would you say?
Well, like,
I don't even know if I say central. It's just on some issues I feel really kind of Marxist, and other issues I feel really kind of conservative.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think it's I think it's really difficult to continue to try to resist being pigeonholed by the political system.
Yeah, I totally
I think
agree.
the problem with people who try and identify as left or right end up
I
trying
agree.
to shoehorn any issue they try and shoehorn their left and view into, even if they kind of think, well, I can't really justify that because I have to maintain this stance. I'm going to say something I don't really believe in.
Yeah.
Which I think happens quite a lot.
Yeah, I think it's quite good that it's all saying that like you work on like your own personal principles and stuff, and then wherever it falls right, left, you take that stance. Yeah, that's quite interesting. And then I had one more question, and this was from Tom K.
Right.
So shout out to him.
The face is
It's a nice student.
Well, let's see what you think. Okay, so hard capitalism, so like every single like capitalist policy, or hard communism, if you had to pick one. If you had to pick one. Like,
I mean, he asked this before he had the chance to hear everything I've just said. So I mean, I kind of think it's going to be meaningless. It's kind of meaningless.
It's fine if you dodge that.
It's kind of meaningless. It's not that he knows that's me. He couldn't have very advanced it.
Okay.
I would say more like, why did you ask the questions in that order? I feel like Tom Payne in short changed by romance.
I mean, it's sort of just to pick one or the other. You could have just said one word and answered it.
I think going forwards, I don't know, Chad, you botched that a bit, mate. To be honest,
I mean, to be fair, it's been turned into a botch by other people. To be honest, but
I've been invited here and now I'm being blamed. I'm not.
I think truth shouldn't matter whoever the guest is.
We just got deep again. We kind of like
Rowan's coming out swinging.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Moving on swiftly. This one is from Stefano.
Yeah.
And Stefano just
you
won.
sat next to him all year, of course.
Yeah, I have done it last year and have been this year.
George Brinley on the other side.
That's right.
Yeah.
Shout out the dog.
It was good. It was very productive actually. There was some early, there was some early issues in the first few weeks, but then it just kind of got down to business. Very productive corner of the room.
I think.
Is that because you talked about keeping friends together?
Yeah.
But from what Harry told me, there's a certain person in your class who you moved away.
Oh yes.
Well, I just think eventually, eventually you go from a sort of free market mindset towards a planned economy when you have to interfere.
Yeah. So basically, Ivan had to be moved.
Well,
isolated in one half of the room.
I'm not sure that happened.
That didn't happen.
No,
Listen,
I've only just had one group chat site.
It's not possible to sit everyone on one half of them.
No, not that. But we said that there was like 3 seats either side or something like that.
I think I encourage people to work together.
What
the one from Stefano was that he's sort of taken. I think you said a couple of times that like affirmative action makes sense in some cases, and I think Stefano wanted you to sort of articulate and argue why that is, why you sort of support affirmative action.
Affirmative action.
In like either in like job recruitment or like in university applications.
But are we talking about racial affirmative action or gender?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
So we began to liberalise the workplace and equalise legal rights between races and genders in a thoroughgoing way in the 1960s. And I guess I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to say that continued until this millennium, until well into this millennium, that laws were still being created to try and equalise things. It's really hard to equalise outcomes or to have meaningful, movements towards equal outcomes and equal opportunities if wealth disparities aren't tackled, or if wealth disparities are allowed to continue to influence opportunity sets. So as long as wealth can buy opportunities, then wealth inequalities will translate to opportunity inequalities, even if the law says that everyone's equal. Now, when wealth inequalities take whole generations, centuries to shift, if at all, right? I mean, the patterns of the richest people or families, groups in the UK are maybe even 1,000 years old in some cases. It's not the case that changes we make in the 1960s about who's legally allowed to do stuff will translate into meaningful equalisation opportunity for hundreds of years. Just thinking about, for example, the sort of emancipation of African Americans in the 19th century. You've been freed. You might at that point have certain legal rights that place you on an equal footing to the white settlers, but you have no money. And the money, the economic benefit that you generated through your output and your work was all accumulated by the farmer on whose plantation you worked or whatever. And so you've been freed, but you kind of are still a slave in a sense because you've got no savings. And the farmer then uses the wealth that they have saved to pass down generations, and that just gets passed forward from one generation to another, compounding at interest. And meanwhile, you hand down, at best, small savings and possibly debt to your progenitors. And so the point behind affirmative action is to try to say that this is one way to try and counterbalance the buying of opportunities using inherited wealth, or wealth that has been generated along racial grounds because of inbuilt discrimination in society. It's a very contentious issue, because you have to sit across the table, or an institution might have to sit across the table from someone and say, although you are the best person for the job, we're going to give it to someone else because of a big historical movement. And that is potentially insulting to the person who gets a job as well as insulting the person who doesn't, and might anger whole swathes of the population, and might deepen racial divides rather than smooth them over. So it's really hard to see how to solve that without causing strife one way or another. You're either going to cause strife to the dominant rich majority, or you're going to cause strife for the minority by allowing an injustice to continue.
I mean, would you, when you say by allowing an injustice to continue, you mean more like that an injustice of the past to not be, I guess, accounted for in a way?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you
I guess there's not much.
inherited a load of money because the money that you should have inherited was not paid to your forebears in the form of wages, that's an injustice, isn't it?
So saying that if say like
your great-great-grandparents were slaves, and so they weren't paid any money for their wages. So when they died,
yes.
no money was passed forward,
and
instead it was kept in other hands.
Yeah, I see.
So you didn't inherit anything, and so you're poorer than you would have been if slavery had never occurred.
I mean, would you not sometimes? I guess like in theory that makes sense, but I mean in practice, statistically, I mean, like in terms of homeless numbers, it doesn't always play out as like a major majority. In fact, I guess the majority is I guess maybe just slightly disproportionately swayed to black people, only a very little bit. It's quite representative of the population. So would you say that those injustices of the past, would you say like, or how would you argue that they're still prevalent today? or like they're still living on or have an impact on today?
Yeah, I mean, you picked homelessness.
Yeah, just
there
an
are lots of
example.
different metrics. I'm not an expert on this.
Yeah, just an example.
I'm not really an expert on many things. I think that I guess what I've been saying is about a philosophical questioning of the situation, rather than trying to pick apart any particular case study, because I'm not an expert in any of the case studies. So like,
Yeah, I see.
I'm not an expert in colonial history. I'm not an expert in slavery.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in emancipation laws and the civil rights movement. I'm not an expert in feminism and gender rights.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in any of those things. But what is obvious, what seems obvious to me, is that if one person exploits another person and then passes down the benefits of that exploitation to future generations, who are able to use those benefits to buy better opportunities for their children and for themselves, that seems something uncomfortable about that. And affirmative action is attempting to address that.
Yeah, I see. It's more of a philosophical thing. Yeah. Go on.
So you mentioned like discrimination quite a lot, and in one of our lessons last year, I remember we were talking opposite, so we're talking positive discrimination, so like quotas in industry. Is that something you necessarily agree with, or is that sort of the case where you were again playing devil's advocate? Because
well, I think what's really interesting is looking at the number of female senior executives in the UK's biggest firms, for example.
Yeah.
And recognising that there's a bit of a circular problem here in that if women don't get promoted, they won't end up rising eventually to the top of companies. They won't sit on the boards of those companies, and they won't provide role modelling for people who are new to the organisation to believe that they can succeed if they work hard.
Yeah.
And so you end up with a vicious cycle where there are no women at the top, and therefore no women joining who feel empowered and kind of lean into the organisation and work hard. And once again we come up against this issue of it's kind of patronising to provide a quota, but it also serves a function as a bridge towards meritocracy, recognising that there's some kind of special historical discrimination that's occurred towards a particular subgroup.
I think role model is always a point that I make as well. I mean, we were looking in geography at like the inequality in, I think it was like 4 major categories, and it was like economic, political, health, whatever it all was. But the important one was the political one. And it compared how many men compared to how many women there were in like parliaments in each country. And pretty much all over the world it's massive for men. And our teacher was basically saying like, how would you like, try and change this? And one of the things that I said was kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, but like trying to invest in like the grassroots, so trying to get girls
I agree.
uh,
like our age interested.
I was going to say that.
And then like, because then if you don't try and inspire generations to get into politics, and perhaps some of them do end up like in parliament, it just provides like a role model, something to work toward and trying to see, oh shit, then I can do it. But there's so like few women even in the UK, because it's one of the most like forward-thinking countries in the world, when the women are so equal. And then you look at the people who run the country, and there's so few women, and you think as a young girl growing up, like, it must be quite inspiring.
I totally agree, because like what is that like statistically, I mean they're not really as interested. I guess that is in part without having any role models, but I mean that's sort of the point I was going to make, that like sort of encouraging from like early on with like initiatives to inspire women. It's probably fairer, potentially more productive than sort of forcing it in because then you have qualified women who deserve to be there rather than being put in there simply for a quota.
I think one of the things that I'd be reticent to do as a male is to propose solutions in too much detail. Why do you think I say that?
I think to propose
solutions to gender inequality.
Yeah.
Is it because you feel that as a table of upper middle class white males, we really don't have?
Not all of us are white.
Oh,
that's
really
let's be clear.
I just said that.
I get. No, please don't. But you keep this in as well with him asking.
Sorry.
All right. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I guess I sort of still fit in, but I mean, I see the point you're saying, but I mean, do you not think that although like the logical argument is there that to solve the problem you should probably go to those who might be facing the problem, right? That makes sense. But I guess a sort of solution, or like people proposing a solution, shouldn't be discounted simply because they're not, simply because they're male.
No,
it might be.
I think it's a reluctance rather than an inhibition. I think that what you're really doing by showing reluctance is making sure that you don't occupy the bandwidth that historically men have occupied to the detriment of women. Does that make sense? So like, we recognise that men have occupied a privileged position in politics in just about every country you can care to mention, for a really long time, like thousands of years or something. Yeah, again, I'm not an anthropologist, so. So once we acknowledge the problem and the problem becomes kind of named and labelled and measured, if men then try to kind of solve the problem, there's kind of like, that it just makes you feel uncomfortable. And it's not to say that we should completely withdraw and have no further say in social life. It's to recognise that we've been in this really privileged position as a gender. We just need to, I think part of the beginning of really positive change is to just start to be a bit more aware and cautious about how we say things and what we say.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, although I guess a lot of people would counter that I guess going towards like, I guess, a sort of idealistic society, that it should be that like instead of always having, I guess, not walking on eggshells, but always having this sort of awareness, should sort of not be there. I think everyone should be free to like, I guess, put forward proposals, even issues that maybe don't concern them, because you know what I mean, you should be living as if they're, because at the moment in terms of legislation there isn't any like really inequality there, so I guess people should sort of live that way, and if there are social issues it should be addressed not through I guess influencing people, but more through not more through like sort of inhibiting those with privilege, but I guess helping those who might have suffered historically.
Right. Wow. Do you have any more questions? Because I was going to say we're recording this and sort of like the whole sort of science end it's kind of like a glass cube, would you say?
I'm very hot actually. It's warm in here.
Yeah. Well, we've had a lot of people.
We'll get them to have a look at our recording studio, and for the next podcast we'll have sorted it out.
Yeah. What I was referring to is that I've been sitting this way, like focusing on the windows. People are just constantly walking in. I keep on seeing Dr. Edwards, he pops up. It's like they go on. No. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, look, I'm really grateful to have been invited on, and I would really encourage you guys to carry on doing this. I think that it's a wonderful thing to do. Clearly, you've got the facilities for it now. I think that it's, you know, gaining the experience and the expertise to run shows like this is really invaluable. I think it's a fun thing to do. I think it's something that I suspect you'll look back on it and feel really kind of like you miss it once you leave the school. So take every opportunity to do this regularly and do keep up the hobby. I think the radio is a wonderful thing.
It's a podcast, right?
It's the radio.
Yeah, they are the same, just I guess, a sort of on-demand medium.
Yeah, just on behalf of all of us, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming on and expressing interest and like getting us like.
Thanks for reviving the podcast.
Yeah, it was great. We can't get our friends to listen to it sometimes. You listen to them and enjoy them, which is great to hear.
It's definitely been the most interesting discussion we've had.
I think it's the best. I think it's the best we've done.
People want to listen to that. I think we've had a few like kind of joke ones, and I think it is nice to listen to some really interesting debate, which I think we've had. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Perfect. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.